Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so delighted you could all be with us. I'm Hannah Myers. I'm the Director of Policing and Public Safety for the Manhattan Institute. This is our third annual lecture honoring the legacy of MI scholar George Kelling, who passed away in 2019. Our honoree tonight is Ray Kelly, former two-time NYPD Police Commissioner, retired Marine Corps Reserves Colonel, former Commissioner of the U.S. Customs Service, Undersecretary for Enforcement of the U.S. Treasury Department, and currently CEO of Guardian Group. Commissioner Kelly not only worked with George, but embodies his commitment to data-based creative policy ideas to make communities and cities safer. Engaging Commissioner Kelly in conversation tonight will be James Gagliano, retired FBI supervisory special agent and currently CBS law enforcement analyst, as well as the mayor of Cornwall-on-Hudson. But first, we are honored to have Heather McDonald speak about the legacy of George Kelling and the work of Ray Kelly in the context of combating urban disorder. It is a problem most New Yorkers are experiencing right now, and so many in this room are working very hard to combat. Heather is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor of City Journal, and a New York Times best-selling author of The War on Cops, among other wonderful books. Her writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the New Republic, the New Criterion, and many other prestigious venues. She is a recipient of the 2005 Bradley Prize and numerous awards for writing on law enforcement, for bravery in journalism, and for excellence. So Heather, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to honor George Kelling and Ray Kelly this evening. In the early 2000s, during the height of the driving while black craze, Professor Kelling invited me to speak about alleged racial profiling to his criminologist colleagues at Rutgers. Ordinarily, this would have been an exercise in masochism. Professor Kelling, however, was not going to put up with the usual BS from his fellow faculty, so the afternoon proceeded with a surprising absence of vitriol. In fact, I don't even remember being called a racist, a reflection of Professor Kelling's intellectual authority with his colleagues. Professor Kelling taught me much about the realities of inner-city crime and how those realities inevitably affect policing. His insights about the importance of public order were revolutionary. I suspect then that he would be mystified by a society that puts toothpaste behind bars, but not the thieves who regularly steal it. Drugstores across New York City have secreted the trivial items of daily life, aspirin, shampoo, and lotion, under plexiglass barriers. To purchase a tube of toothpaste, a customer must ring for an employee who may or may not show up to unlock the protective shield around this apparently priceless commodity. How many customers waiting futilely for the sales clerk, have decided from now on, I'm buying online? This novel ritual, strangely reminiscent of life under communism-induced shortages, is not due to any economic failure. It is due to a failure of will, the will to enforce the norms of civilized society. The result has been an epidemic of mass looting and shoplifting in New York and other American cities. We have all seen the videos. Thieves crashing into storefronts with SUVs, or viciously wielding sledgehammers against plate glass windows, stripping the shelves, and then fleeing in their getaway cars. Then there's the leisurely stroll through the aisles, shoving items into a 50-gallon trash bag and unhurriedly exiting the store. It's hard to decide which is more shocking, the violent assaults on store infrastructure or the confident shoplifting ramble. That confidence comes from one thing, the knowledge that mass stealing will bring no consequences. Our elites have decided that they would rather subject the property of honest businessmen to mass expropriation than to apprehend and punish looters. And the reason for that deliberate non-enforcement of the law is that enforcing the law has a disparate impact on black criminals. That is not because the law is racist. It is because the disparities in criminal offending are so great. The mass theft that has beset New York City since the George Floyd race riots, up nearly 39% this year and up 45% since 2020, is arguably as disturbing as the violent street crime. Drive-by shootings represent a breakdown in socialization. Fatherless young men, raised by single mothers in chaotic households, think nothing of spraying bullets across a sidewalk in the hope of taking out a gang rival. The innocent bystanders who are routinely hit in those drive-by shootings are not the target of the violence, they are collateral damage. That does not diminish the tragedy of their deaths, of course, or minimize the fear that violent street crime spreads throughout the city. But mass theft represents a breakdown not just in socialization, but in respect for a pillar of Western culture, property. The founders understood that protecting property was the basic obligation of government. The creation of property is the result of man's noble struggle against the insecurity of nature. Through commerce, he lifts himself and others out of privation and vulnerability. A society where stores are routinely plundered, where diners are routinely held up for their jewelry and watches, is no longer a society, but a feral free-for-all without rules or security. The innocent victims of mass looting, shop owners, managers, employees, customers, are the intended target. They are not collateral damage. We are all therefore equally vulnerable. Rampant theft reflects contempt for the bourgeois virtues of hard work, thrift, and deferred gratification, virtues which Madison, Hamilton, and Franklin believed were essential to a republic. Earlier this year, a squeegee extortionist in New York City said to a female driver trapped in her car on 40th Street and 9th Avenue, quote, "I know you got some money. I know you got some money." Translation: if you have something I don't have, I am entitled to take it, simply because I want it. That sense of entitlement has been nurtured by the pervasive discourse that America is endemically white supremacist. That message, amplified by the organs of elite society, whether the New York Times or, God forbid, Harvard University. Whoops, I forgot, where are we? Trickles down to the streets and breeds the self-serving sense that all American institutions are illegitimate. Our current de-incarceration policies purportedly have a positive rationale as well, beyond avoiding disparate impact. Keeping criminals in the community, activists say, will prevent crime more effectively than locking those criminals up. We tried this approach in the 1960s and 1970s. The ensuing crime surge sucked the vitality out of American cities and triggered massive white flight to the suburbs. After the George Floyd riots, criminal justice players rushed to give decriminalization and de-incarceration another try. The results were predictable. Criminals are not being rehabilitated, they are simply committing more crime. It would be wonderful if de-incarceration could succeed. Prison and jail are not ends in themselves. But we don't know how to reliably transform criminals who for the first 20 years of their lives were failed by their parents and by their communities. Incapacitation and deterrence are our best, possibly our only crime-fighting tools, short of a reconstruction of the inner city family. By now, every New York politician who is not screaming from the roof of City Hall and the state capitol every single day for the arrest and reincarceration of criminals is complicitous in crime. And that includes our nightlife-loving mayor. These politicians are on full notice that every day, dozens of businesses and residents in New York City will be robbed. Yet they turn their eyes away from the continuous assault on the hardworking New Yorkers who give the city its unique commercial landscape. Instead, they grandstand about more funding for illegal aliens and about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis, at least, is serving his constituents. From now on, the rule must be, you are a criminal, you are not getting the benefit of the doubt. You are not getting second chances. We have tried 5th, 10th, 20th chances. They don't work. The benefit of the doubt from now on must go to the law-abiding, not to the feral and antisocial. It is the people who respect the law who deserve the top attention of our policymakers, not those who decimate it. Business owners voluntarily risk their savings and their pride in the city's brutal competitive environment. But in starting a business, they are not assuming the risk that it will be plundered with no response from public officials. Ray Kelly knows how to fix this travesty. When everyone asserted that New York City crime could go no lower, he brought it down further. He was the last NYPD commissioner with guts. He defended stop, question, and frisk against the specious charge that it was racially biased. His mayor, Mike Bloomberg, even uttered the taboo truth that blacks were actually being understopped by the NYPD and whites overstopped compared to what their crime rates would predict. That observation created a total media meltdown. Ray Kelly was the original broken windows crusader, being the first NYPD leader to crack down on squeegee men. He kept a binder of photos in his office of public order violations so that he could be sure that they were being addressed. Our current mayor calumnied Commissioner Kelly during the disastrous 2015 stop, question, and frisk lawsuit against the NYPD. Eric Adams, testifying for the plaintiffs, claimed that Commissioner Kelly had given a patently absurd racial justification for pedestrian stops in a meeting of black lawmakers. Adams' testimony was contradicted by the attendees at that meeting. Yet, despite perjuring himself, Adams suffered no consequences, a harbinger, perhaps, of our current mess. Commissioner Kelly could be forgiven for washing his hands of New York at present, but it is our good fortune that he continues to provide us with his crime-fighting wisdom. Now, if only Eric Adams would listen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ray Kelly.
Yeah, right, got it. Thank you.
All right, my mic's on? Excellent. Normally I have an outdoor voice inside, so if I overpower you, Commissioner, I'm not yelling at you. It's just the only way I know how to speak. So first of all, I want to say thank you for having us here tonight. This is a thrill for me. I don't want to do too much of a fanboy thing, but the Commissioner and I met back in 1993 when I brought the first FBI director over to 1PP. I was just standing there. I wasn't allowed to speak. Children are to be seen and not heard in those days. But it was a thrill then, and watching what this man has done for New York City, I just want to run down a couple of highlights of his career. So we're going to talk tonight with the longest serving commissioner in the history of the NYPD, and the first and only to hold the post for 2 non-consecutive tenures. A combat vet, a Marine, 1963 and 1965, 45 years in the NYPD, a colonel in the Marine Corps Reserves, a director of the police under the UN mission in Haiti, served as Undersecretary for Enforcement in the Clinton administration Treasury Department, served as the Executive Commissioner for Interpol, served as the Commissioner for the Commission Chair for the New York State Athletic Commission, and Commissioner for the Customs Service. Most interestingly, served under 2 different mayoralties, the Dinkins administration from September 1st, 1992 to January 1st of 1994, small break in service, came back as NYPD Commissioner under the Bloomberg administration from January 1st, 2002 to December 31st, 2013. I have the pleasure of interviewing the 37th and the 41st police commissioner of the greatest police department the world has ever seen.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jim.
Sir, after reading all that, I think most of the room feels you are the classic underachiever.
I just want to say two things
Sure.
before we start. First, George Kelling was a friend of mine. He was my professor in the Kennedy School at Harvard, which I got an A, by the way. And I actually brought him on as a contractor to help with some quality of life issues in I think 1993. But anyway, he was a good man. And the thing I really liked about him was he was common sense. He was, had both feet on the ground. He knew the business, and I think he'll be seriously missed by, and is being missed by the criminal justice community. Secondly, I want to thank Ken Corey, who's here. He is right now the chief of New York City Police Department, but he announced that he's leaving. And he's an outstanding police executive, and I wish he stayed around, but he's got other work to do. But thank you, Ken, for everything you've done.
All right, sir, you ready to get into it?
I'm ready.
All right.
Maybe.
All right. Let's start with this. So in 1990, New York City at its apex suffered 2,262 homicides. You left in 2013, and it takes a while to turn a battleship, but I think in 2014, 2015, the NYPD, a credit to the men and women, the 36,000 cops that you have under your command, the NYPD had driven homicides down below 300. So after a quarter century of unprecedented successes on the crime-fighting front, New York City finds itself in a similar position to many other urban areas and other cities across the country, facing sharp rises in shootings and homicides, and since then, other major crime index or crime categories have seen similar spikes: robberies, auto theft, burglaries, grand larcenies, all up 33%, 29%, and 39% through October 23rd of this year. The subways, wait till you hear this one, have almost as many murders since 2020 as they had in the 2 preceding decades. Wow. General forms of disorder, illegal drag racing on New York City streets, dirt bike gangs taking over the streets, open-air drug use, and brazen, as Ms. McDonald spoke about, brazen retail thefts seem to have New Yorkers on edge. Sir, would you agree that what we have on our hands right now can be fairly characterized as a public safety crisis? Putting aside hyperbole, despite the crime measures remaining well below their 1990s peaks, are we currently in a public safety crisis?
Yeah, I would agree with that, primarily because I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. The department, as long as we have Mayor Adams in position, is not going to change its tactics or strategies. He's not going to let them do that. So we are going to have this number. It's probably plateaued somewhat, but it's going to continue, and obviously the percentage increase will be less because it's based on this year. But I'm talking as we go forward. I think that even more important issue is the hemorrhaging of police officers out of the department. It is a huge problem. And also retaining incumbents and recruiting. How do you get people to join an organization where thousands of people are leaving? They're leaving before they reach their retirement age or retirement ability, and they're just packing up and going. It's not what they signed on for. So that is something that is going to have to be addressed soon. And I've spoken to somebody in city administration, not the police administration, but they are concerned about the quality of people that will come on the department and who is now applying, they're seeing a lot of criminal records in the applications, and that obviously that's a huge concern.
So let's stay on that thread. So there's a major problem right now with recruitment and retention. And with the NYPD being hard pressed to recruit folks who don't want to come in and face the uber scrutiny and the vitriol and the rhetoric, what should the department's order of operations be? The aim to restore the public safety gains, which many New Yorkers have grown accustomed to, or in other words, should the department weigh order maintenance, and this brings you right into broken windows and how that basically began, its genesis, in relation to violent crime investigations? Should order maintenance be prioritized now, even though that has been demonized through the false narrative that this is either racist or it disproportionately affects some communities versus others?
Yeah, I think we're actually past that, because we're at a personnel level, manpower level, that doesn't allow something like order maintenance. I really haven't heard that term since I was in Japan, where they have a couple of thousand police officers every day in the middle of Tokyo for order maintenance. If something happens, they dispatch those cops. But I think to the extent we have order maintenance here, it's baked into the system. Precincts address that for the most part. But when you say sort of the sequence of order, there's two fundamental services that have to be performed. That is emergency response and investigations. So if you, as the department treads down, it's a very difficult situation to manage, because people are retiring. You don't know where they're retiring from. You know, they come up to their time and they go, or they just leave. So it's not uniform. You've got to, usually the chief of personnel would do this, but you've got to monitor and shift people around. Now, they have a police academy class that graduated just a few weeks ago. The target was roughly 1,200 police officers that they wanted to hire. The class was about 600, and that 600 police officers are going on the street. But you can see how if you keep this situation up, you're going to fall very short. So we have to do some innovative thinking here. I think federal government can help with money, and that's really the only thing the federal government can do. But we need to think about, and maybe we bring in an outside McKinsey or somebody to take a look at this. What will motivate people to come? Is it money? Is it bonuses to sign on? Is it college scholarships? Or, you know, we need to think seriously about that. Otherwise, in my view, we're going to continue to this downward slope. Just, you know, cops now say they won't recommend the police department to anybody. Certainly not their relatives. So that's something like that has to be done. And also, I would say this: there's a lot of regulations that have been put in place post George Floyd. There was and it was a terrible, terrible event. No question about it. But there has been, in some quarters, an overreaction. So at least 300 pieces of legislation have swept the country to restrict police officers, to eliminate in some certain quarters, including here, qualified immunity, which is a defense that all public servants can use. But in New York City and other places, they've passed legislation saying that police officers cannot use it. This is a federal court situation. But it is about the only thing I can think of getting people to sign on and stay is those two things.
Incentivize. Okay, so let's stay on the thread in regards to resources. And I think one of the things that you and other commissioners of recent have done well is take the resources, deploy them smartly. Just because you have plenty of resources, whether it's money or whether it's cops, that's not always the margin of victory. And I think it was probably back in the latter stages of the George W. Bush presidency where the Sturge strategy was begun by Generals Petraeus and McChrystal. And I remember sitting there with a bunch of SWAT guys at 26 Federal Plaza, FBI SWAT guys, and saying, man, I've seen this before. And I remember looking it up, and it was in 2004, you and Mayor Bloomberg were conducting a briefing on Operation Impact. And you had a pointer, and you pointed out 52 hotspots across the 5 boroughs, and you committed 1,000 police officers to flood the zone, essentially a surge strategy. Do you think that's something that there would ever be an appetite for now? I know there's been discussion about putting more cops in the subways, and I know it's election time and people are jockeying and doing things for appearance. But do you think this is something that, as the pendulum swings, we will get back to where something like Operation Impact could be something utilized again, sir?
They're doing it right now. They
Under a different name.
That's exactly. They put a coat of paint on it. But it's the same program. You take recruits out of the academy and put them in sort of in clusters in high crime areas. Now, I was criticized for that because these are rookies. Hey, what do you, why are you putting them out there? We obviously link them up with experienced people. But it was interesting, the comments that I got from sergeants and lieutenants that were out with them on the street. It was the energy. They wanted to work. They wanted to do lots of things where a more experienced cop may not engage the way they engage. So yeah, they're actually doing it right now.
All right. So I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, because I think this was something that was a hallmark of your administration and your time as commissioner. Stop, question, and frisk. And I think something that makes me bristle every time I hear it mischaracterized as stop and frisk. It's essentially the Terry v. Ohio stop, and the purpose is a brief investigative detention to determine whether somebody's committed a crime, is currently committing a crime, or is about to commit a crime. Let me give you a couple of statistics. In 2002, the NYPD conducted 97,296 stop, question, and frisks. In 2011, at its peak, under your tutelage, 685,724. In 2019, that number had shrunk to 13,459. Sir, do you believe that dispensing with stop, question, and frisk, the Terry v. Ohio stop, has led in some way to the crime surge?
Yes, I just want to introduce Dermot Shea, former police commissioner. I should have done it before. Great to have you here. So, what is stop, question, and frisk? It comes from the common law. This is what you want the sheriff to do if there's suspicious activity. You want them to go and investigate. It's codified in virtually every state in the union. In other words, it's in the law. It's in the criminal procedure law. As Jim said, has a Supreme Court case that validates it, Terry versus Ohio. Jim mentions a number, a pretty high number, 650,000 stops. Wow. You know what that is? That is less than 1 stop a week per patrol officer. We took 19,000 as the patrol force, and less than 1 pat down every 2 weeks by patrol officer. Everything is bigger in New York. So we did have a trial. The judge held on to the case for 12 years. There was no doubt what her verdict was going to be. And I'll talk about that in a moment.
Judge Schindler.
Shira Schindler.
Yep.
In the trial, there were only 19 stops that were examined. 10 of those 19 stops met constitutional muster, according to her. There was an expert that the plaintiffs had, looked at 4 million stops going back, a decade or so. He found that 96%, 96% also met constitutional requirements. So that's what we had. But we knew what Shira Schindler was going to do from the get-go. Now, we should have had an appeal ready to go. Let me say this. Shira Schindler was removed from the case after the verdict by the Second Circuit, which does the appeals for this geographical area. She was removed sua sponte. That means on the Second Circuit's own volition. This is done so rarely. She was removed because of pretrial publicity that she put forward. So those are some of the facts. We can never really get that story out. It is a pejorative term. I don't want to be frisked. Nobody wants to be frisked. We understand it. In other jurisdictions, it's called field stops, field interrogation, that sort of thing. So the name is part of the problem. Do I think it added to the crime problem? I think that it has an effect on guns and the carrying of guns and the willingness to carry guns. It is a tool. It's a tool that I think every police officer should have in his toolbox. Now, I know that this is controversial. I know we'd have a difficulty and friction trying to reinstitute it in any great degree. It goes on now, but it's it goes a very small number when you consider the number of, say, suspicious man in front of a building. That's like 200,000 calls a year. But they're not making out the forms, or maybe if they're talking to him, they're still not making out the forms. So I think you have to think of some imaginative ways to get it going again. But I think it's of value, and I think I want to say this about the gun tactics and strategies that they're using now. I think it's very inventive. In the precincts, there are FIOs, they call them, Field Intelligence Officers. It was started by Bernie Kerik before my second term there, and I expanded it. And they are the sergeant, and now they have police officers working for them. But they basically are using CIs, confidential informants, to tell them who has a gun, to go into court and getting a warrant based on the probable cause, and they're arresting people. That has been very effective. We see that shooting incidents are down like 14%, murders are down 14%. By the way, this is a national phenomenon. Murders are going down in Chicago, and shootings, which nobody thought could ever happen. You know? So to answer your question, I think it has an effect. To reinstitute it would be a challenge, but I think it could be done because people are getting more and more frustrated, and you need that sort of public support. We've got to do everything we can do, and move in that direction.
All right, so we're talking at the micro level. We're talking at the street level, which is important because nobody cares about the crime index except how it applies to the corner of walk and don't walk and where they live. That's where it has a huge impact. But let's go to the macro level, the criminal justice system writ large. Let's look at our state, New York State. So a number of fairly controversial things have recently been passed. Cashless bail or bail reform, raise the age, discovery reform, the chilling effect of discovery reform on cooperators and witnesses, and then progressive DAs across the country. Sir, speak on each of those if you would, and give us your idea of how much of an impact, how that hurts policing or helps policing, and where you see this going next year.
Well, cashless bail, Dermot Shea was involved in making a very good argument. This could be handled by the legislature, just passing an addendum to the bill that allows judges to make a determination on dangerousness, which is going on throughout the country. Why aren't they doing it? Because they don't have to. It is the arrogance of the legislature, in my opinion. It's both the Senate and the Assembly. you know, they made the argument that it's racism. It'll be, you know, somehow it will be detrimental to people of color. The fact of the matter is that about 90% of the people arrested in New York State are people of color. So, you know, it was a false argument, but they have a supermajority, and if you read what they say about it, they can do it, and they're going to do it, and they did it. As far as the attorneys,
Progressive district attorneys.
yeah, well, I think it shows how
Alvin
clever
Bragg would be a perfect example.
clever George Soros is. He's been running an effort, a program, since 2016 to fund progressive district attorneys in various places. He has to see where they're available and do it. So it appears that at least 26 of district attorneys who he has identified as being progressive, in which he gives about $1 million. Now, $1 million is serious money to a DA's campaign. You know, here in New York State, New York City, we have 5 of them. You know, but so very, very crafty, because that's where the choke point is in the district attorney's office. But you mentioned Alvin Bragg. Where does district attorney's discretion stop? I mean, you just rewrite the law? He's given everybody a free ride here in Manhattan. They're not going to write up any theft of service reports in the subway. You know, go right ahead. He's not going to write up any resisting arrest efforts. I don't know if you recall, but it was fairly well notarized, but there was a African-American police officer fighting with an African-American teenager in the subway. And they showed it for about a minute. I mean, it was a real battle. That individual was not charged with resisting arrest. I mean, this is just something that shouldn't exist, in my judgment. There has to be some control, some rules, laws, or whatever written someplace. And it's not just the governor. You know, yeah, we're talking about it in a heated campaign. But there has to be some restrictions, I believe, on district attorneys' discretion, and put together committees or smart people and think about it.
How do we deal with that when we expect attorneys and district attorneys to exercise prosecutorial discretion? And if the people push back, constituents push back and say, this is who we elected and who we want, is it appropriate for a governor or a politician, an elected leader, to remove somebody without it going on a ballot?
Well, that's a good question, a legitimate question. It depends on, you know, how far out of bounds you go, and we need some guidelines in that regard. And,
Guardrails.
Yeah, guardrails. Yeah. So it's something that has to be discussed. We got to get a lot of smart people in the room and talk about it.
All right, sir. I'm watching the bosses, and they're telling me how much time we have, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions and answers from the audience. So my final question to you is this. You come out of retirement, you put the commissioner hat back on, and you are the police commissioner.
Better you than me.
There's your deputy commissioner right there. So you're a commissioner again. What do you think are 1 or 2 things that you would do on day one to impact this crime surge, sir?
Well, I would put back in place the anti-crime units. I did this work 100 years ago, but I know it's effective. If you look at the crimes that are up, they're mugging crimes, they're robbery, they're grand larceny from the person, they're grand larceny auto, burglary. You need, in my view, we need people who are not wearing uniforms, who maybe go to certain robbery-prone areas, or maybe they know a criminal, they follow that person. But you can't do this kind of work in uniform. And the perpetrators, they know that there is no anti-crime out there. They know, okay, they're looking for a marked police car. But after that goes by, there's really no threat. They're not looking over their shoulder. And I think it would, it's not a panacea, but I think it would go a long way to reducing the blatantness of it. I know prominent people in this city who have been robbed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the Upper East Side. That's scary stuff, and it's really in your face. They're not sneaking up. I don't know if you're walking up and pointing a gun at them, or taking a bag, and without any fear of being arrested. So, I would also quality of life has gone so far downhill in this city, and one of the things that de Blasio, many things that he did in the city council, they had decided not to put any restrictions or regulations on scooters. So now you have scooters that go 25 miles an hour. They're on the sidewalk. They're all over the place. I mean, they are a real danger. I was going back to, I was going to an event when I was a commissioner, and I saw a guy go by on a bike going 25 miles an hour, and I was in a car. He hit a woman. Woman was out, unconscious. She had brain damage. I followed up on it. I don't know the final disposition of her, but if you're anywhere close to my age, you really got to look 360, boy, to make certain that there's not something coming up behind you. And they have no lights on. I mean, at night, you're riding down and moving, as I say, 25 miles an hour, and you can't see them. Or you're looking the wrong way. It's like going to Japan, where you're looking, but the car comes the other way.
All right, are you ready to take some questions?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, just wait until we get a microphone to you. I've got a hand up here in the front. Can I get a microphone here? And then just wait and just speak into the microphone, please.
Hi, thank you very much for coming, and this was a great talk. 2 questions. One, you mentioned that you should have had an appeal to the stop and frisk, but you didn't. I thought that de Blasio dropped the appeal, but
he did.
If you can clarify.
He did, but we waited a month before the papers were filed on the appeal. Oh. The Corporation Counsel Office sat on it.
That wasn't your fault then.
No, it was their fault,
Right.
and I think it was done intentionally.
Right. The other question I have is, Mayor Adams said he wanted to bring back the, I call it the undercover unit, but whatever the proper name is.
Yeah.
Then, the next thing I see, the policemen are wearing windbreakers saying New York City Police Department. Why would he want to do something like that if they're so useful in infiltrating these gangs?
Well, he was trying to, have half a loaf. He was, these are anti-crime people, but they're wearing uniforms, but you got to be close to them to see that, So, yeah, I mean, in my mind, it didn't make sense, but, he has obviously a base that he's has to work with, and he saw this as a way to sort of address the anti-crime issue. Well, yeah, it's not in my opinion, but it's in place.
We have another question. How about the gentleman with the glasses straight back on the back there? Just speak into the microphone, sir.
Thank you. At the very beginning of your discussion, you touched on a striking paradox that I've thought a lot about, which is that, well, on the one hand, we're not nearly back up to 1990 levels yet of total crime. At the same time, we have just shocking examples of anarchy that we never had in the worst days of 1990. Most notably, what Heather talked about in her introduction, the shoplifting with total impunity. And not just impunity from the government, not impunity just from woke DAs, but impunity from the merchants who are being, who they're stealing from. And it's not, we're not talking about the Latino bodegas or the Korean delis here. Those guys fight back. We're talking about the big national chains, the large corporations. They don't even call the police. And it doesn't seem to be out of a sense of futility that the police wouldn't do anything. As much as I share a lot of the criticisms of Eric Adams, we're not Portland, thank God. I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, that if the police were called, they would arrest these guys. So they seem to be acting out of this sense of woke compassion. So my question is, while we're appropriately shouting from the rafters at the politicians who have allowed all these policies like so-called bail reform to go on, like Heather said we should be doing, shouldn't we also be shouting at a lot of these woke capitalists who are just allowing their property to be pilloried and just passing the costs along to the rest of us?
Well, what they would say is that we've seen it in San Francisco, we've seen it here. The district attorneys won't write this stuff up, or if they do, it's meaningless. So it's like spinning your wheels. I share the same frustration. You go into a CVS, everything is locked up. You can't get somebody to open it up because there's two people working it. So I also the Soho area. It has high-end stores. You'll have 20 people show up in some of these things. Go into the stores, wipe them out. They may not have a gun. They may have a security person. They give them one of these. This guy's not going to be fighting over a handbag. He's going to, do whatever you want to do, and they'll take off. Now, I think that has a real sort of organized crime feel to it. I think you need CIs, confidential informants. You need some entity in the police department that's going to focus on a sort of a syndicate rather than individual events. The precinct detective squad, they're too busy. They can't do it. Somebody told me that the average number of cases that a detective had just maybe 5 years ago was 27 cases. Now it's 80 cases. So they're overwhelmed. But I think that would send a message, at least, that you can't pull up here with 5 cars from New Jersey and wipe out all Gucci bags and take off without any consequences. I'd love to see that.
Sir, in the back, and then I'll get you, ma'am.
Yeah, Commissioner, is there any big city police force in the United States that is effectively fighting the trend of disorder and is supported by its mayor?
Not that I'm aware of. Most big cities, there's about 20, 25 big cities. The reality is that they all have significant minority populations, and that's part of the problem. I say the problem because that's where shootings happen, that sort of thing. And I don't know of any city that sort of has the poverty and has a significant number of people considered to be poor that is calm and peaceful. All of these places have cops that are leaving. Some cities more than others. They're going. You could look in the paper, look in the New York Post. You'll see these shields in the ads. These departments, Hallandale, Florida, or whatever. They're paying $75,000 a year. Palm Beach in Florida has a significant number of NYPD offices. It's a much nicer way to work, way to go to work, and people are not harassing you, not running around taking your picture. So to answer your question, I'm not aware of any what we would call big cities that not having an element of the cops leaving and or being disgruntled, and that disgruntledness translates into inaction. Don't forget, cops have a lot of discretion in what they do. You know, you're responding to a radio call, a big fight, whatever. Well, you just might not get there at the all deliberate speed. You know, they don't want to. We talked about qualified immunity before. They don't want to jeopardize the well-being of their families. They might lose their homes. At least that's a scenario that's out there, you know. So why should I bother? Now, if there's something in front of me, okay, I'll take action. Or you're assigned, you know, on a radio call to something that's not particularly of an emergency nature, you know, you'll handle that. But it's very tough to measure that. It's very difficult to say, hey, this guy should have responded more quickly, you know. So anyway, that's my feelings about the big cities.
Ma'am, right here.
Thank you. Does everyone need me to stand, or are you okay? Thank you. Good evening, Commissioner Kelly. First, let me thank you for your service to this city. This is my city, the city of my home, where I became what I am. I'm now a citizen of the District of Columbia, and thank you for your service to our country. I'm on the ballot on Tuesday, and in the District of Columbia, I can tell you it's a living hell. On Tuesday, the DC Council, and we had to fight. The citizens are very supportive of law enforcement. The citizens I've represented, very supportive of law enforcement. But the city council took it upon themselves to rewrite the DC code. They took out assaults on police officers. They took out defecating in public, urinating in public, robberies, sex trafficking. They wanted to decriminalize everything. So I had a meeting. I got on the horn, and I sent out emails to everyone in the city that I had an email address for, and I told them to call the council chairman and tell them to push back. So we got a temporary reprieve. I just wanted to give you that backdrop. So that's our nation's capital. We deserve to be safe. We deserve to be safe. I would just like to ask you your opinion about what Chief Conti can do, what thoughts you might have, how we can strengthen the shared partnership, our concern for law and order, because citizens have an inalienable right to be safe wherever they are, and we are fighting like we've never fought before to maintain our public safety. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is you have to change the leadership in cities like Washington, D.C. I lived there for 4.5 years, and I saw some of the issues that they had going on. And it's just a question of who people vote for. You look at the city council here. Nobody knows who they're voting for here. They just don't. You know, there's very little information that comes out. And the city council has become more and more radical over time. You know, the Democratic Socialists of America is a fairly strong group. They will put up 5 to 8 candidates each time there's a vote for city council people, because they term limit out. And people are really way out there. So it's you know, it's a simple answer, and it's a very complex thing to do, because people have their own lives to attend to, and they may be looking at the top of the ticket, but they're not necessarily paying too much attention to who that city and council person is. And that's where a lot of power lies, particularly if they've moved way to the progressive side, which they certainly have in this city and other cities throughout America. A lot of it is, as I said before, the overreaction to George Floyd's death. Again, it was a terrible event, and probably set law enforcement back at least 20 years. But these laws, rules, regulations that were put in place, and these really radical people just were given carte blanche. You know, it's just, can we get some of that back? Who knows?
We got time for one more. Ma'am, your hand was up first. I'll call on you right there.
First of all, I would vote for this lady tomorrow. I love
Come back to New York.
The second thing is I wanted to ask if Governor Hochul loses to Zelen, Lee Zelen, does Lee Zelen have the authority to get rid of Alvin Bragg, the
He
DA?
certainly thinks so. He has said it. He says it in a commercial.
Yeah.
He's still going to try. I think it probably is. The reality is a drawn-out process, appeals and that sort of thing. But I'm sure he's researched it and he has the ability to do it, and he's made a promise. So I think it'll happen if he gets elected.
One more? All right. Ma'am, your hand was up first. Just wait for the microphone, even though you're close, just so the people in the back can hear.
So with the Supreme Court ruling about guns in New York, how does that impact us, and what can we do to protect our subways and things like that in order to make sure that
I
we're
don't
safe?
think it'll make much difference at all. I think if you go through the process of getting a carry permit, and that process is going to be as onerous as they can make it. You know, now they're saying this will probably be overturned. Now they want to see your social media accounts. You know, that's kind of absurd. And if in fact I cannot think of a crime that I've responded to or heard about of a licensed pistol holder involved in a crime. Could it be? Could it change? Yeah, but I personally doubt it. And where do you see what they try to keep adding on to the regulations?
All right. Well, I just want to say this. I got to tell you, I sat up here and I felt a little incongruity because, I'm the mayor of a small upstate village and I have a 13-member police department similar to the NYPD. 3 full-time officers, 10 part-time, so we really know what we're doing. No. First of all, what a huge privilege, sir. This is, I've been a fan for a long time. To have 2 former police commissioners here, both responsible for a lot of the turnaround in New York, and I said the only thing that would have made my night if we could have gotten Teddy Roosevelt to come back. That would have been a good one. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a nice round of applause for Commissioner Kelly?